In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts, which we're about to receive from thine bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. And thank you for the coffee and donut people who put this all together. So this is going to be part 2 on gratitude. So a little bit of review. So just to review, we all know people who are miserable. Don't look at me that way. And they always think, if they just had this or that, then they'd be happy. And we know the opposite of people who, I know people who are suffering with cancer and yet are so happy. And the opening point was just that most of life is illusionary. If you think this or that will make you happy, you're not really living life. You're living an illusion. And it is gratitude that makes us happy, not happiness that makes us grateful. The second point I tried to make was about positive psychology, that they found there's all these emotional and health effects for those who regularly practice gratitude exercises. Emotionally, it helps you get over trauma better. It helps in people with recovery, helps your heart, or that's physical. But anyhow, practicing gratitude is a great first aid for emotional problems. Also, physical benefits of better heart condition, lower blood pressure, lower inflammation, quicker recovery on illnesses. And so that was emotional, physical. Today we're going to cover spiritual. But the conclusion is that really we have the keys to happiness in our hands if we just practice it. And a couple other virtues. The other is that I mentioned God commands us to practice gratitude really every week on Sunday, but also daily. And the idea, though, there is gratitude is not individualistic. You can't be completely happy if other people that you love are not happy. Try and tell some mother, just be happy when her child is suffering. Happiness, what they found out in positive psychology is that happiness is not a pyramid with me up here, then everybody else down here. What happiness really is a network of connections. So gratitude is a social connection, but it has to be practiced daily. And so I tried to make this point that happiness is not a mood, it's a work ethic. And the work is gratitude. The paycheck is happiness. And I just think after a lifetime of practicing it, you gain this momentum. And so I know this woman, I ran into her the other night, and I've known her quite a while, and she's a younger woman, and she was kind of complaining about her mother's small dementia. And the mom has a little bit of dementia, but the problem is, and I know the mother quite well, she always has been grateful and always been happy. But the problem is that now that she has a little dementia, she's not rich, but she feels so blessed and so grateful that she keeps thinking she's about to win the lottery. So, but I like that. I tell people, I feel like I've won the lottery. I just haven't had the right ticket yet. But in her dementia, she's so grateful for life that she thinks she's going to win the lottery, and she keeps contacting financial advisors to decide how to give the money away, and then the daughter has to call and say she has no money. She just calls if you're going to lose your mind, I'm sorry, why not lose it without feeling like you won the lottery, and plus it's tax-free. But the point being is that gratitude, it's something that you have to build up the momentum. So that's just kind of last week, and this week I just want to get more on the spiritual side. So quick review. And does anybody have anything they want to say or questions or observations before we get on the spiritual part? All right, well, we'll jump into it then. So, actually, I want to start with the origins of religion. And oddly enough, I have this degree in liturgy, and one of the sections that we had to deal with was the anthropology of religion. I know that sounds strange. To study liturgy, you actually do study the origins of it. Now, there's this guy named Richard Dawkins. He's a major atheist, and he is always putting this theory up that the reason that religion started was that people were afraid. And because they're afraid, they needed to justify their fear that there's this big boogeyman God who is watching all your behavior. Now, Richard Dawkins drives me up the wall because he always claims he's a scientist and then comes out with stuff that has no evidence behind it. But there actually is a lot of evidence on the origins of religion. And I personally find that amazing. Like in Paleolithic times, you have these cave paintings. We didn't live in caves. We did rituals in caves. And what it seems to show is that rituals were based on initiation rites, but also seems to incorporate a lot of gratitude. And then studying primitive societies, their religion is based on gratitude. So if you're a hunter-gathering society, before you eat, if you kill an animal before you eat, they all have these gratitude exercises. So the preponderance of evidence is that really one of the origins of religion was this need to give thanks. And even in the Bible, when you have Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, if you notice, they connect the idea of meal and sacrifice and gratitude. So in the Bible, God commands us to be grateful. And with the right image of God, we have to give God thanks. And in Genesis, the Hebrew is a little tricky. It's poetic. You know, the opening of the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, when it says in the beginning, most of us will think, oh, the beginning of time. And that's true, but with Hebrew poetry, there's always double and sometimes triple meanings to everything. And so the Hebrew word in the beginning is also if we were Jewish, the Hebrew word would immediately connect us with the ritual of first fruits, of giving first fruits. Skipping the Hebrew, just trust me on this, but the festival of first fruits, Jews took that very serious. Jewish farmers would, if a tree was blooming with fruit, they'd tie like a ribbon or a string onto it to mark which ones were first, and those would be harvested back to God. So first fruits was a mandatory feast that pre-existed Moses. And it means that, what it means is this. Why did God create the universe in the beginning? God created because God is thanksgiving. God is gift, self-giving gift. And the response to creation should be gratitude. So in the Mishnah, when it speaks about Adam and Eve, and you can say, well, what was the sin of Adam and Eve? There's many ways to answer that question, but in the Mishnah, it says that they were expelled from the garden for lack of appreciation, lack of gratitude. That's how they lost it. And you say, where's that? Well, think about this. Adam, when he sins, he blames God for the sin. He blames the woman. And he literally says, the woman you gave me. He can't seem to appreciate any of the gifts that God gave. And so in the Mishnah it says, we lost the Garden of Eden because of a lack of gratitude. So in Judaism, you keep the Sabbath for many reasons, but the Sabbath is to give God thanks, and it recalls what it truly means to be a human being. A human being is meant to be grateful. An infidel, somebody who can't give thanks, is less than a human being. In Judaism, you're obligated, also in Catholicism, to pray 2 times a day. One would be Thanksgiving. Or take the ancient Greeks. We're just talking the origin of religion. And the ancient Greeks, like Aristotle will say, you know what the goal of life is? And if you read it in English, it's kind of horrible because they'll say happiness. And that is true, it's happiness. But technically, the word that the Greeks believe the goal of happiness is eudaimonia. And remember, anytime a word in Greek starts with EU, like Eucharist, or eudaimonia, it really means good soul or good life. So the question is, well, how do you define happiness? In the ancient Greeks believed happiness was not pleasure. It's not even to be free from pain. Happiness is a good soul. And they would say that takes work. So like the Stoics, the Greek philosophers, believed in practicing gratitude. The Stoics knew that wanting less correlates to an increase of gratitude. And just wanting more and more obliterates. So Epictetus talked about this special form of awareness that is called the master key to happiness. And the word Epictetus uses for this is, write this one down, Eucharistos. Does that sound like anything you might have heard before? And the idea of this meditation, Eucharistos, is bound up with this sobering up. It has this idea of sobering up so they can truly see the world in each moment. So the Stoics believe that practicing gratitude, Eucharistos, strengthens our relationship with others and help us see the world. Now, just on a side note, there's actually a lot of Greek philosophical terms that are in Catholicism and in the Gospels. We're just not used to it. So you could call the Mass the Passover, the Feast of the Lamb of God. That would be Jewish terms. The Eucharist is a Greek philosophical term that we adopted. Does that make sense? So we'd say the Eucharist is not the Greek meditation practice of being grateful, but it still has that idea of being grateful, creating a good soul. So stop there. Questions, objections? Nothing? Okay. I just think that's amazing that for early Christians who practice the Eucharist, remember there's many terms to that. But gratitude, the third part is gratitude is never individualistic. In Genesis, we're commanded to gather together to give thanks. Because I always get this question, well, why can't, I find God on the golf course. That's where I feel spiritual. No, that's where you have fun. Church is not supposed to be fun. In golf, you really don't have this sense of community. The commandment in Genesis is that we gather, and Exodus, is that the Sabbath demands that we gather together. You have to be grateful to another, rather than just grateful to yourself. I love country music, and to me country music is kind of spiritual, but that's a gratitude to myself. It's a pleasure I have. It doesn't link me in with other people. You can be grateful to nature, to God, to your wife, to others. So gratitude actually takes you out of yourself to be in relationship with another. So gratitude implies the other. Just being happy on a golf course is not gratitude. That's actually self-pleasure. Nothing wrong with it. Go ahead, Mark.
I have a question. Okay, did you see that in the Garden of Eden they were, because they didn't have gratitude?
Well, that's what the Mishnah says.
But many years ago, none told me that it was after disobedience.
Well, okay, so in Hebrew poetry, you could have more than one answer. So, yeah, it'd be the act of disobedience as well. So it's not one single answer, but a couple answers. One would be ingratitude. What's that?
That's the one I'm staying with.
Well, obedience is your strong suit. Not so much your sister. She's not here, is she? Because she'll beat me up. So just think about it. We have come from this incredible long history of gratitude. It seems to be the very origins of religion. Old Testament sacrifices were about giving gratitude. In Judaism, each meal, every time you eat, also in hunter and gathering societies, is a time to give thanks. You have daily thanks. You have the Todah sacrifice. Remember, Todah is a Hebrew word. I mentioned this last time. When the Messiah comes, he'll end all sacrifices except the Todah sacrifice. That's the Thanksgiving sacrifice. In the New Testament, we have the Eucharist, which is really a Thanksgiving meditation established by Christ. Catholics and Jews are supposed to give thanks at least once a day. Or even I know this sounds strange, I love funerals. But I love funerals where it sounds strange, but the core of a funeral is actually a Thanksgiving ceremony where the person is placed in front of the altar as God, as an offering, a gift to God. So that when you die, why do Catholics get married in front of an altar? Because you're going to sacrifice your life. And the final act is when you're done, your body's put in front of an altar, because your life is supposed to be this gift back to God. This act of thanking God for this person's life, and this person's life is a gift to God. So even a funeral is about gratitude. And so this one mystic said that when you die and you see God, I always like this. He said, your first experience is just incredible gratitude, thankfulness, when you get to see God. And I like that because that's what a funeral really is about, is thanking God for the gift of this person's life. So, well, we would say religion, the origins of religion, is really based on not fear of appeasing an angry God. That's technically a heresy. The origins of religion is thankful, giving thanks to the Creator God who gives us everything. Except the problem is that I like the word exercises because it demands regular, not just feeling grateful, but gratitude is work and happiness is the paycheck. The problem is we can all know this in our head, but unless you actually practice it, it does no good. And this is a strange quote. It's from Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was a harsh thinker, we'll put it that way. But Nietzsche said this: scholars are bloodless. They don't incarnate their knowledge. They're hypocrites because what they talk about doesn't affect their actions. That's actually a really good criticism. Basically, they're bloodless. They talk a lot about stuff, but you don't see them put them into action. If everything that positive psychology says is right about gratitude, and religion demands it, saying you believe in God is fairly bloodless. You have to practice a life of gratitude. Gratitude, thanksgiving as a way of life. And so, how do we do this? Well, everybody knows that you're supposed to pray every day, and also keep the Sabbath, go to Mass. But here's a couple more. So this is what the rest of the class is on. One, I was thinking models of gratitude. And for me, that'd be the saints. You have all these saints that if you study their lives, they can't help but give thanks. Look at, today is the feast day of Mother Cabrini. In one sense, she had an awful life. I mean, it depends how you dissect it. She was premature, she was sick her entire life, incredibly frail. She had a fear of water. I mentioned this in Mass. She had a fear of water, and the one thing she prayed is, God, please never make me get into a boat. Now, my advice is that if you have some fear, never tell God it. Because he'll make you go through it. I know that guy. So she prayed, don't put me in a boat. she goes back and forth between the United States and Italy 30 times. The hierarchy gave her a hard time. She dies caring for other people. She had a hard life, and if you look at everything in it, all she could do is give thanks. Incredibly happy. Look at Saint Ignatius. Actually, Saint Boniface and Saint Ignatius said that the beginning of sin is ingratitude. Very Jewish, but the beginning of sin is ingratitude, to not be able to give thanks. So for Ignatius, just to explain this, he came up with the examen. I'll get into that in a second. But Ignatius himself believed, oh no, you have to practice this. And so at St. Ignatius School, we make the kids memorize one prayer, and we say it every week. And it's Ignatius's prayer of generosity. Just kind of curious, how many people here know the prayer of generosity? Because I can only say it in a room full of children. Anybody know it by heart yet? Really? Oh. It's a great prayer. So this is what our children, after they receive communion, this is what they pray all together. Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not count the costs, to fight and not heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward. Save that knowing I am doing your will, except to know that I'm doing your will. Ignatius called that his prayer of gratitude. I love the fact that our kids pray that every week. Or Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence, if you don't, he was this, after World War I, was this French monk, ex-military, obviously a soldier. But he kind of cracks me up because he just basically was a cook in this monastery. And he was a big man, and I just like this line from him where he said, I'm a big man who tends to break a lot of things. Anyhow, his spirituality turns out to be a saint. His spirituality is what he calls practicing the presence of God. And Brother Lawrence believed that everything and everywhere is an experience of God, but we let ourselves be dominated by trivial things. So he'd say, it doesn't matter if you're peeling potatoes or taking a walk or whatever you do, you're surrounded by the presence of God. And if you practice gratitude, it wakes you up to the presence of God. His kind of spirituality reminds me of David Thoreau, who said we should have models, but most of our lives are frittered away in small details. I just like the practicing the presence of God. A model for that would be Brother Lawrence or John Teller. He was a German Rhineland mystic, great mystic. But gratitude is the thing that kind of sparked his spiritual beginning. Granted, he was already Catholic and everything, but he meets this beggar, and he says, I hope you have a good day. And he says, every day is a good day. Every week of my life, my whole life has been good. And the beggar says, I am a king. And he says, John Teller says, where's your kingdom? And he said, within me. I have conquered everything. All I can do is give thanks. And John Teller was moved at a beggar who feels like he has nothing but gratitude, but technically sick. So gratitude started to be his way of mysticism. And just like, so those are models, but you can pick your own model. And so they did this gratitude experiment where all you have to do, the experiment is this: think of somebody who's influenced you the most in your life and write a letter thanking them. And it doesn't really matter whether they're alive or dead. But just to think of somebody in your life that you're grateful for increases your happiness 4%. And it's a really cheap way to get happy. So think of somebody, write them a letter. Or the odd part is that if you did write them or called them, it increases your happiness 19%. Expressing gratitude in a physical way seems to be the best way to get happy. But certainly not just the saints, but hopefully everybody in in here has somebody that you can thank. Or another experiment was list 50 people in your life who you're thankful for. List 50 people, like just writing a list out. And Abraham Maslow, and he did this experiment of thanking people before they die. How would you honor their influence? And Abraham Maslow, if you don't know who he is, he's kind of the founding father of humanistic psychology. And late in life, he developed kind of this spiritual dimension. And he described gratitude as having the power to recharge your soul. And at the end, Abraham Maslow, at the end of his life, he became increasingly convinced that it was the ability to feel and express gratitude that was the most important part of emotional health. And yet he said, if you look at psychology, it's the most neglected as well. Conversely, Maslow viewed the widespread presence of ingratitude in our society, whether among our family members or relatives or neighbors or coworkers or clients, as a sign of emotional pathology. And so, like if you're trapped in a family of ingrates, it's even more important that you practice gratitude for emotional health. Another very famous psychologist, Siegelman, he measured moods after writing a letter or contacting a person, and people who were suffering depression were less depressed and had greater happiness after 1 week. And so the odd part, he would say, he's a great psychologist, regular gratitude exercises seems to make people happier. Religious language is, it's good for your soul. So one, models of gratitude. Clearly, we can all have them. Secondly, meditation, prayer. The one I love the most is actually the Examen. But I love the Examen the way Dorothy Day did it. Dorothy Day, do you guys know who Dorothy Day is? I love the way she did it. And she called it a duty of delight. And it's just the St. Ignatius Examen with a twist. And that is, she'd breathe 3 times and pray for the light of the Holy Spirit. That's step 1. Step 2 is gratitude, where you see everything as gift, except you have to name 3 things that day that you're grateful for and review the day. Now, in positive psychology, they call this doubling down the joy. That the more you think about something, the more your mind tends to think in that direction. So when you think about that thing in the day that you're grateful for, 3 things, you want to recall it with as much detail as you can. It doubles down the joy. And then the third thing is survey your day to see where you made your mistakes. What could you have done better? And say an act of contrition for each. And then the fourth is to end in hope, that tomorrow's going to be even better. Like Dorothy Day, one of her spiritual practices was Ignatius Examen. I think that's a great meditation. And one of the things I find really funny is Ignatius talking to his monk saying, I know people. They'll let a lot of things go. If you skip your breviary, if you skip, this or that, never forget to do the Examen. And he tinkered for years, like what makes people truly better or not. In one sense, he was not just a spiritual leader, he was kind of a psychologist. He wanted to know what worked and didn't work, and he considered the Examen the best way. Another is you could invent, back up, do this. On the Examen, I was kind of surprised. One Lent, I asked people to do the Examen, and 2 married couples came to me separately, and they said that they noticed what caused my husband to react in ways that drive me up a wall is that, they did the Examen together, telling each other, and then they realized the thing that drives them up the wall about the other person is what they cause. They connected the dots to realize my husband does that and it drives me up the wall, but he does it because I did this. And does that make any sense? So for them, it helped them. And just to be thankful. I just thought this was really interesting because this one couple, I'll use different names, we'll say Sally, did the dishes, and she did them again, and she said to her husband, I did the dishes. And he said, oh, I didn't notice. He may not understand why she's upset. Not only did he not notice the problem that the dishes had to be done, he doesn't even notice when the spouse is taking care of the problem. And it's not about the division of labor. It's about the ingratitude. And anyhow, in 1980s at UC Berkeley, this sociologist wrote on the economy of gratitude that a couple gives gift to a relationship is being thankful for each other, what the other person has done. The worst is if they don't even perceive the gift, that they're just taken advantage of. So I just kind of, wow, even in gratitude, even recognizing your sins, to have the other person say, you know, it does drive me up the wall that not only do you not notice that there are dishes, you never even thank me that I've done them. Like, that makes sense to me. It increases gratitude. Or I did this funeral maybe 3 weeks ago. My memory's time compressed for me. But like it was a really good funeral, but kind of sad too. But he died hunting, had a heart attack and died hunting. But the one thing she knew is that she was loved. She said, you know, I might as well throw him under the bus. She said, you know, I really did love him. He loved me. She said, I could have done without his temper, but he was working on it. But the week before he went hunting, he wrote a card, and in the card, he put a card in rows before he went hunting, and it said, you're the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I said, wow. And I said, did he do that a lot? And he says, yeah, it would just be a single rose and a note that you're the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I just kind of thought, wow, what a nice thing to receive. I mean, I know it's sad he died, but that's what she gets. So you can have these meditations. Another is a rosary of gratitude, which I know sounds strange, but did you know you can make up your own mysteries of the rosary? I found this out my first year of priesthood because I'm kind of an idiot. And do you know Jake, the musician? So his grandparents are Zoe and Joe Einig. And I'm newly ordained. They're in Caldwell, and she has a heart attack. So I went to go anoint her. The next day I go to ICU to check her out again. And I talked to her in ICU, and she politely asked me to leave because, I think this is funny. So she politely asked me to leave because they wanted to say a rosary for world peace. And I said, there's not a rosary for world peace. And Joe and Zoe said, oh yeah, we just make up our own. Like they just take parts of the gospel and they just created their own rosary. Now, here's the odd part. Here's a woman who's dying, and they're more concerned about praying for world peace. So then I called this this monk, who's a theologian. I said, can you make up your own mysteries to the rosary? And he said, yes. You know, that the ones we have are a guideline, but you can make up your own mystery. And I just thought, wow, you know, at the end of life, they're not concerned, Lord, save me from my heart attack. They're more concerned about world peace. Why can't you make up a rosary for gratitude? Or, like, I love the Stations of the Cross. I write my own Stations of the Cross. Why can't you have a Stations of the Cross of gratitude? So you could take almost any Catholic devotion and turn it into something of gratitude. Mary.
Okay, we always have prayers to say a rosary for world peace and for different things in the world, but we don't make up the mysteries.
Well, you can talk to the Einigs. They made up their own. Well, they took them from the Gospels, but they made up their own. So there you go.
Because we have to
Yes, Pope John Paul II. Well, I don't think really God cares about the rules of that. I think God cares that you're grateful. I'm just saying, why not be like the Onyx? You can turn any Catholic devotion into something of gratitude. A third way is journaling. I know that sounds strange, not my strong point, but they did find that people become more aware of things that they're grateful for, rather than taking them for granted or as granted. That if you can take up journaling, so one sentence Saint said, and I like this: happiness doesn't consist of the things you have, but relishing the things you have. Part of journaling, another way is, it's called the George Paley effect. George Paley, I don't really know if I'm saying that correct. In the movie, what is that movie that's always played at Christmas time? The guy, It's a Wonderful Life. So this is done by this researcher, Dan Gilbert. He asked people to write, what if you never existed? What if such an event never happened? What if you never met the person you were introduced to as your wife, or taught you how to control your temper? And what it causes people to be more grateful. It reduced what they called adaptations, or that you just expect everything to work out is a way of being grateful. The George Paley one, what if your life was to, people increases gratitude. Writing a letter, I stated that before, but Kent State did an experiment where every 2 weeks you would have to write a letter thanking somebody. Send a thank you. Now, they were instructed to avoid trivial letters, but write every 2 weeks so that they don't get burned out on gratitude. And the control group, who didn't write a letter, their happiness remained just the same. The letter writers who had to write thank you letters actually experienced less depression and more happiness and even greater health. So the odd part is it seems to slow people down to appreciate things. So this sounds kind of horrible, but yes, you should teach your kids to send thank you notes. Write thank you notes. Because, like, I have to be honest, for years I'd give my nephews Christmas presents. And it's not like I have a lot of money, but I never got even a word. I can understand boys not writing a thank you, but would it kill you to pick up the phone? So, to be honest, I just stopped giving them birthday gifts because my friends' children, who I consider my adopted nieces and nephews, they'd send me thank you notes. So I told my mother that once, and she said, I've told them that several times. But not because I need the thank you note. You want to have your kids say thank you notes because it increases their happiness and reduces their depression, rather than just expecting that, Uncle Len will always give something. Why not teach him the keys, as the Greek said, the keys to happiness? One of the keys is gratefulness. So I think you should send thank you notes because it makes you happier. Give thank you notes, blessings before eating. Teach your children that. The fourth is symbols. I like symbols. I think they work. So one parish, they did something at Easter time I thought was kind of funny. They got those yellow bracelets, what do you call them? Brands, but it just says thankful on it. So everybody got one, so during Easter time, it was a reminder to be thankful. I thought, well, that's really kind of neat. And what you'd do is, after you had given thank you, you'd put it on the other wrist, so you could remember every day, at the end of the day, that you've been thankful. I thought, well, that's kind of clever. Or this one positive psychologist, Sean Aker, he wanted his family to be a family of gratitude. So they started doing gratitude exercises that I mentioned this in a homily, where around the dinner table they'd all write something that they're thankful that day. And they'd write it, and then they'd have this vase, and they'd put it in the vase. He said, I wanted them, so the vase gets filled up. He said, I wanted them when people walk by, they'll think, oh, our family has a lot to be grateful for. It's just a visual cue to remind them, oh, we have a lot to be grateful for. So, to be honest, in our staff meetings, we started that. We have a big bowl, and we all write down one thing we're grateful for. So, anyhow, I just think when gratitude reigns, the grumbling decreases. Another one besides a vase is, this sounds strange, is, you know, with kindergarten kids, they teach them how to say thank you in sign language. That actually just kind of reinforces it. So, like, if you have little kids, why not teach them how to say thank you? In sign language, it just reinforces the neural pathways to be grateful and hence more happy. And then there's this movement, I didn't catch on in Idaho, of saying thank you to military people. So my mother always does it. If she sees you wearing a hat that says Vietnam veteran, she'll go over and thank you for their service in every restaurant. But a lot of military don't want to be centered like that. Does that make so? The original. What's that?
Then why are they wearing the hat?
Well, I don't think
They
they
want
were.
me to
I
come
think
over
that's
and
out of
thank them.
pride, not. They were so. This one person started this kind of movement. It's more, I think, in more Michigan or someplace. But the original sign language is not this. It's actually from the heart with the hands stretched out. So when you'd see military people, they would do the thank you from the heart as a gesture rather than say anything. I don't care. I'd still like the symbol. So the last one.
What's the symbol? My back was straight.
This is the modern one, but it was this. So
Okay.
with military people,
That's like blowing a kiss.
yeah, a lot of people blow me kisses too. I just like to assume that they're saying thank you, but it is like blowing a kiss. Isn't that? And then good is this one? No, morning is this, right?
This is one.
This is what?
This is one.
No, morning, like good morning.
Morning is the sunrise.
Are you sure? Oh, Jennifer says it's this. Are you sure? I'm not doing that. All right, Jennifer. No, don't go into it, Jennifer. Just leave it.
We live near Camp Riley in Kansas. And when people would see the soldiers in uniform shopping or at restaurants, there are tons of people thanking for their service.
Oh, see, I think we should be.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of meditations, writings. Those are all exercises. I think the big one to me is the examine. So, take questions, answers, objections. So, I have more to go over of suffering, but since everybody's at tables, join a table, and how about this? Discuss about one exercise that you could do as a family or personally. So, we'll take 2 minutes. So, discuss. Then we'll get back to suffering.
That's a way of showing.
All right, why don't we gather back together? Did anybody? Okay, the Scottish are getting out of control. Does anybody have anything that they want to share on exercises in your life other than what I've mentioned? So I'm just going to go around the room. So not that you have to, but.
We had a question brought up at our table about if you live alone,
Such as myself.
such as yourself, how do you do some of these exercises that?
Well, I do that for me. Like I can just speak for me. I do the exam every day, and this sounds strange, but I try every other day to send out a thank you note. Wouldn't stop me.
I haven't got one yet.
Because you're an ingrate. But I also have a symbol in my house about gratitude. So it's just a visual cue. So those are 3 I do. Anybody want to share? Yes, way back there.
Okay, so someone may live alone, but they have to go to the grocery store, they have to go out of their house to be with other people who maybe very seldom are thanked for what they do. We just assume they're there for us. So I would think we aren't really impacted.
That is kind of true. Like I had a friend visit from California, and I always have my favorite checker at Fred Meyer's and Albertsons. And the person was saying, "I can't believe you know your checkers." And this is, I know. And I said, "There's like I always give her a hug, and she gives me a hug." So he said, "Well, is she a parishioner?" And I said, "I don't even think she knows I'm a priest." You know, I mean, there's no. But yeah, why not thank everybody?
I know.
Go ahead.
I know. I make it a point when I go to like a basketball game to thank the people that are being the ushers that are doing the work around the building.
When she goes to basketball games, she thanks people around the building.
Yeah, sometimes you can thank God, I guess, I guess other people too. For being less than giving you things that you really didn't want, so that you had to think about it. So you had to cross over to a place that you wanted to protect yourself from. You know, I mean, the risk. Thank God that He put risk in your life, or thank the other person that they're challenging, but
I always thank God
know,
for. I really do. I like one of my little jokes. I mentioned this yesterday. Is your enemies will set you free, and I tell myself that one because, like, some people. Okay, you. No, like at the gym, I notice some people drive me up a wall, but like I want to be free of being judgmental, but I wouldn't know how judgmental I am if they weren't there. So I know, but I'm kind of grateful that I have to be around certain people.
it's strange for that company.
Madeline?
Yeah, I had the neatest experience yesterday. I was at the grocery store, and there was.
Can you guys hear, or do you want me to repeat? Okay, she had a neatest experience at a grocery store.
There was this little girl about 3 years old, if she was that, And she saw that some of the mayonnaise jars were upside down. So she was writing them. And I said, "Thank you so much." And she looked at me, and her mom said, "What was she doing?" It was just so sweet.
See, you could give thanks for that at the. I know I'm kind of strange, but I try, and when I really like something, because I count them up at the end of the day, my thank yous, and for my evening prayer. So I always try and say a glory be if in my head, if like I'm thankful for something, so I can remember at the end of the day to give thanks for that. So that would have been a glory be. So, yeah, Jane.
I have a prayer that I say in the morning. Good morning, God, and thank you for the glory of the sun. Thank you for the health I have to get my duty done. I shall devote the hours of this lovely day to you in honoring and pleasing you in everything I do. So once more, good morning, God, and please depend on me because I want to honor you for all eternity.
When did you learn that prayer? That's cute. Oh. I still think you're kind of small, so. Okay, so just to kind of go into another subject, just gratitude and suffering, because to be honest, St. Paul says, give thanks under all circumstances. But I don't know, it seems to me in the United States, part of our thing is that you can't really be thankful if you're suffering. Because I swear to God, I get this with teenagers all the time. Well, if God exists, then why is there suffering? Well, who says suffering is evil? So I think there's just this connection between gratitude and the cross, and even suffering. Look at Zoe and Joe. They do a rosary for Thanksgiving, even though literally she's close to dying. Or there's this book, I didn't finish, but it's called A Garden of Eden in Hell. And it's written by this woman named Alice, who's the oldest living person to survive a concentration camp in England. And she was 108. And people were still coming out to her apartment to hear her play the piano. Oh, actually, she kept playing until she was 104. But she believes we need to teach people how to be grateful. So she speaks about the duty to teach the next generation how to be grateful. And she's happy. She passed it on to her son and her grandchildren. And so some of her quotes are this: I had such a beautiful life, and life is beautiful. I love nature and music. I love people. I love life. I love everyone. I'm interested in the lives of other people. Life is a gift and should be cherished, and we should pass it on and teach others to be grateful. So this interviewer asked her if she felt pain in the concentration camp. And the answer is yes, the concentration camp was awful. But then she says, but I remember a lot of laughter. I gotta imagine there probably wasn't that much laughter in the concentration camp. But I know this sounds strange. In positive psychology, that sometimes you really only, if you're grateful, you only remember good. And so I think it's been shattered. But even the concentration camp, her whole life, she's an incredibly happy person. So when atheists say, well, if there's God, how can there be suffering? But how do you know suffering doesn't wake you up to joy? And I use the example of my own dad. I've told the story. He's had everything in life, but he only became happy when he had ALS. Not that ALS is a lot of fun, Lou Gehrig's disease, but it woke him up to what's really important in life, and he ended life on a good note. Or this Marinol bishop who was in prison for 21 years. And he said he wasn't unhappy one day of it, despite torture and suffering. And he said there's a difference between feeling grateful and being grateful. And he said even years in prison, yeah, he suffered, but he was grateful for every day. And despite suffering and imprisonment, is just a naturally joyful person. Why is it the 5 major religions of the world says suffering is a part of life, and all of them still say you should practice gratitude? So what I'm saying is, gratitude and suffering does not obliterate happiness. Gratitude is still more powerful than that. So we do have a choice. We may not have complete control, choice over our emotions, but practice gratitude exercises, not even suffering can obliterate it. Feelings follow the way you choose to look at the world. And gratitude only becomes a choice more than a feeling with years of exercising it. That's why people who practice gratitude, they're more resilient in suffering. So there's endless stories. There's this guy named Michael who wrote about the struggles with his wife with her Alzheimer's. And in one sense, it's a tragic story. He was overloaded taking care of his wife. And yet they chose to remain grateful and happy for each day. Rather than be bitter and sad about the really deteriorating conditions, all he could talk about is how grateful he was for his wife. To be honest, I find that absolutely amazing. And he was haggard, and yet he said he would do it again. Towards the end, he did, obviously needed help. But all we have is our present life, and life is mostly an illusion. So why not be grateful? I also, not only gratitude is more powerful than suffering, but I also think gratitude helps you see beauty. And so Einstein said, there's two ways to live life. One where everything is a miracle, the other where nothing's a miracle. And gratitude, it seems to show that gratitude wakes you up to the beauty of life. This one priest, I just think this is funny, he is afraid of cats, or was afraid of cats, hated cats. And he goes on this retreat, and this artist made gifts for everybody, where you gotta walk up and pull your gift out. And the gift that he got, had to reach in and hold, was a picture of a black cat. He hates cats. And I think he's kind of funny because he said, my first thought was, would anybody notice if I just And he decided, no, he needs to work on this. He has this negativity, he needs to get over it, and so he hung up the picture and he was determined to be grateful for that picture. And the odd thing, he says, happens. Suddenly he finds cats beautiful. Now granted, that did take time, but eventually he even sees cats as incredibly sleek and beautiful. He just leaned into the problem. Or gratitude and silence. I think there's kind of a connection there. Also with complaining. So, I think our world is too noisy. And there's a book, I haven't read it yet, but it's I can't remember the book, but it's something like Think Big, Think Deep. But we need less noise in our world to think really deep thoughts, to feel. The problem with 24-hour news and constant entertainment is that you can't really think about deeply. And oddly enough, you need some silence for that. I think if your life is so distracted with a lot of noise, I don't think it can be grateful because it's always go, 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 or distraction. So I think you do need some silence. And when I was at the seminary, I still think this is funny. There's a guy named Tom. He was a Cistercian monk who was chosen by the community to become a priest. So late in life, he was a much older man. He was sent to the seminary to become a priest. And I was just coming from the U of I, and really sweet, spiritual, gentle, kind man. And I'm walking to breakfast one morning with him. And so, I don't know if you know this, but Cistercians take a vow of silence. So, it's kind of odd, right? So, how do you do that? So, we're walking, and I'm just curious. I said, so Tom, you're a Cistercian? He says, yeah. And I said, and you took a vow of silence? And he says, yeah, but he says, you can do sign language. And anyhow, so if you need something. But he said, no, silence is really important in life. And he said, the problem is with silence, there's a lot less complaining in the community. And he tells this joke. He said, this one monk goes to the abbot, because every 5 years you can speak to the abbot, every 5 years. So the monk, first 5 years, he gets to meet with Abbott, discuss something, and he says to the Abbott, he says, the beds are hard because they sleep on straw mattresses. The beds are hard. And the Abbott said, oh, thank you for sharing that. Next 5 years come by and gets to speak to the Abbott, says to the Abbott, the food is cold. So thank you. Another 5 years go by and he gets to speak to the Abbott and he says, I'm leaving, I can't stand this. And he says, good, you've done nothing but complain your entire time. But so they have found that, you need a little silence to be grateful. And so this Kasser, he does a strange thing with his kids. Did this experiment where there's no TV, there is video games, but he only allows his kids 30 minutes for video games. And they have coupons and they grow their own food. They're one of those. They only get one gift for Christmas, but his kids don't know any different. And anyhow, he writes about how grateful his kids are because even to grow your own food and the silence, and they play a lot more board games. Life turns out to be a lot more grateful. So to me, I just think there's some connections that suffering doesn't obliterate gratitude. Silence seems to enhance it. But there are some obstacles to gratitude. And as I said, suffering is not one of them. But they have found this. Obstacles of gratitude, one is unforgiveness. That refusing to forgive and wanting to hold anger, it's difficult to be grateful if you're holding on to the definition that I'm a victim and I deserve to hate those people. You can keep one and drop the other. If you cling to resentments, it's so exhausting. You're simply too tired to give thanks. So, oddly enough, what diminishes gratitude is actually unforgiveness. Let's see. Fear also seems to decrease gratitude. There's this odd thing, these evangelicals were handing out pamphlets, and the pamphlet said, swear to God, don't end up like Mother Teresa. I know. And they're taking it because Mother Teresa's personal journal was published. I don't know if you noticed that, but she asked the priest to destroy it, and the horse's rear end, for whatever reason, published it. And in it, she writes in her journal that loneliness continues to torture me. And so evangelicals took that line and said, see, she didn't believe in Jesus. But we're meant to wrestle with darkness and doubt. And even they didn't publish the line, for the first time I've come to enjoy the darkness. So they didn't mention that. But here's the odd part. Like Job, like Israel, you do have to struggle with some darkness. Mother Teresa, in her journal, kept expressing thankfulness for her struggle with her loneliness, for actually even her doubts. So one of the things I clicked onto on Don't End Up Like Mother Teresa is that she had some doubts. We're supposed to wrestle with our doubts. And like Mother Teresa, why not be thankful for it? It's only the intransigent who can't have doubts. Does that make any sense? So the opposite, though, is like St. Gregory speaks about entering the darkness, that the final stage of spirituality is not when you know everything, but you enter darkness. You give up on having the answer to everything. And what they found out is truly grateful people can struggle with doubt. I think it's the fearful who refuse to wrestle with the darkness. Anyhow, I think that kind of fear prevents people from being grateful. Mother Teresa could both admit her loneliness and doubts and still, in her own journal, speak about being grateful. I think the evangelicals who are handing out the pamphlets, they're the ones out of fear who can't truly be grateful. Fear diminishes gratitude. So my only point being is that silence and suffering, that might enhance your gratitude. It's fear and unforgiveness that won't. So, questions, objections? Yes.
I'm reading it right now, Mother Teresa. It's wonderful. It really is. It's food for thought.
That's what the priest said. But I don't know if Mother Teresa said for me to not to publish her journal, I still wouldn't do it, even if it's.
Well, I didn't publish it, but I am reading it.
I know. I'm with you.
It's
That's my out.
excellent.
I mean, I just have to. So. Anything else? Yes.
Is there a decent book on the subject, gratitude and the health effects and that kind of thing?
There's a lot, but it's in positive psychology. So really, you could just Google gratitude, and there's actually a lot of books. I forget what they were, but I did read something. A lot of positive psychologists. If it says positive psychologist, that's probably a good book. I forget the titles of because I'm an idiot.
We
But-
know it's sad.
That's true. Yes.
I'm grateful for you giving his class.
Well, I'm grateful you people showed up.